No, no. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. End it. Finish. I don't. I think Catherine kind of goes. There's nothing else you need to do, is there? Once you've done your bit. And if you could just let us know that you have stopped, because we'll be, we won't start talking about the sort of confidential stuff until we're confident that we're no longer and I think when we can't make sure they don't speak, it's all about children, isn't it? I think it can be. I think if you knew the individuals, they would be able to be identified. If that makes any sense. Hard things to do fairly obvious it wasn't into the February half term with the way the numbers are at the moment. But so my youngest is in the last year of A-level, so all pretty pointless really by the time she gets to that point. Most of the learning should have been done, but probably doesn't think. She's really struggled to kind of absorb it on a on a document that should go back to 4 pictures. This is your 2 years work. Why don't you back it up?
down the participation panel, and I can't see anyone. But if you are new, tell us who you are as you come along. I'm Councillor Kate Weller, the chairman of the Corporate Parenting Board. We've got David Webb. Has David Webb now joined us? Joined the meeting. Hello, David. Lovely to see you. I can't actually see you, but lovely to know that you're here, and you'll pop up in a moment, I'm sure. Right, we'll get cracking, and anybody else can catch up as we go along, I'm sure. So welcome to everyone. Forgive me if I appear to be looking away from time to time, because I'm trying to skip between a number of screens at the moment. Matt, we don't have any apologies, do we?
We do indeed, Councillor
right.
Weller. We have Elaine Okopacki, sorry, I'm not even pronouncing that right, too much coffee, from DPCC. We have Antonia Dixie from Participation People, Simon Fraser-Brown, who is the Service Manager for Dorset Council and Adolescent Service. And we've also just had an apology from the Hills, who are our foster care representatives.
Right, okay, lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right. Have you all had an opportunity to read the minutes of the last meeting? Are you all happy with the minutes of the last meeting? Anybody need to add or change anything there? If you do, give me a shout. If I don't hear from anybody, I'm going to assume that's okay, and as and when possible, I will sign those, okay? Hi, Kathy, welcome. Welcome to everybody who's joining us. Hello, Hannah's now with us. Hi, Hannah. Right, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Again, please shout if you do. No? Right. Because I can't see all of you, if you do want to speak, rather than try to raise your hand and risk that I won't see a raised hand, can you go into the chat bar and just write RTS, which means request to speak, and I will pick that up straight away and bring you in as soon as I can to ask a question or to speak. Okay. Right, moving swiftly on, public participation. Have we got any public participation, Matt?
No.
Thank you, Kate.
Nope. Right. Thanks, Kate. Right, then we move on to item number 5 on our agenda, children in care at risk of offending and custody. And that's, is Teresa with us now?
Councillor Weller, it's Sarah Jane. Teresa's not with us. Would you like me just to introduce David?
Yes, I was going to say, if you would introduce that, then please, Sarah Jane, that would be terrific.
Of course, thank you. And I'm thinking that David is with us. So David Webb, who's going to be speaking to you, is the service manager for the Youth Offending Service, a service which you'll be familiar with, spans both Dorset Council and Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And what David's going to do is provide us with some updating information regarding our children in care, and information which I think you're going to find very helpful. So I'll hand over to David if that's okay, Chair.
That's lovely. Thank you very much. David.
Thank you for the introduction. I've presented it, I've prepared a report which hopefully you've seen.
Okay, David, I'm just going to interrupt you a second. Shall we all switch off our mics, because David is a little bit distorted, and if our mics go off, that might help his...
I did have a bit of toast in my throat. That might have explained the distortion. So
I'll you're a little bit blurred anyway, but that should be fine.
Okay. So what I thought I would do is just give an overview of my report, and then see if there's any questions or discussion to follow. So the overall picture is that we know that children in care are overrepresented in the youth justice system, and that's been a concern that's been addressed over a number of years and has led to some national reports, some of which I've mentioned in my introduction to my report, like Lord Laming's report. And there's data to show that not just children in care are more likely to enter the system, but also numbers of children in custody are disproportionately comprised of children who've been in care or care leavers. So that's the kind of national context. And locally, what we're trying to do is reduce the numbers of children in care entering the justice system, and then if they do enter the justice system, to reduce reoffending and obviously reduce progress through the system. So some of the measures we would look at would be numbers entering the system, and for those in the system, numbers going into custody. In 2016, some of you will be aware, we worked on a multi-agency basis with Dorset Police and Children's Social Care from what was then Dorset County Council, Bournemouth and Poole, and some other partners, to agree a protocol to reduce the criminalisation of children in care. The rationale was that children in care may be criminalised for behaviour where they live, which, if a child in a family did that, probably wouldn't involve the police being called, the criminal justice response following. So what we found prior to 2016 was that at times children's homes in Dorset and in Bournemouth had some good relations with local police and had some good practice, but that wasn't systematic and it didn't necessarily endure. So what we wanted to do was agree a standardised approach across the whole area. So we agreed a protocol, and then the group that developed the protocol have continued to meet ever since to monitor its implementation. In 2018, a national document was produced, which actually drew partly on our protocol, and I was part of the group that developed that. And the aim of it is that is to encourage children's homes and other residential settings for children in care not to call the police unless it's really necessary. So the process would be that they would only call the police if there's an immediate risk to someone's physical, possibly significant risk to property. Otherwise, they're encouraged to try to deal with an incident themselves, or if they feel the police need to be called, to maybe delay the decision and review it, possibly with staff the next day who maybe weren't part of the actual incident. So we continue to monitor that, and the numbers of call-outs to children's homes dropped significantly after the protocol came in. I've included some tables in my report which do show the numbers going back up, but the reason for that is we're becoming aware of more properties where children in care reside, so we're adding more properties to our list. And the graphs that illustrate that are a bit busy and cluttered, but the second one, if you look carefully, does show that the increase in 2020 has been more in the BCP Council area than in Dorset. So in our group, every time we meet 3 times a year, and we look at all the instances where the police have been called to what might be considered offending behaviour in a child in care's place of residence, and we check whether the protocol was applied properly. And if we think that maybe a setting isn't familiar with the protocol or their practices are drifting away from it, there's a named police officer for each setting who will contact them to remind them of what's required. So we feel that we've got a fairly robust way of monitoring that. I've also included in my report, moving on from that, the numbers of entering the justice system. So our overall aim is to reduce all children entering the criminal justice system. And in paragraph 12.2 of my report, I've put a table in which shows the total numbers entering the justice system over a 3-year period from October 2017 to September 2020, broken down by each year. And of those, the numbers that were children in care. So you can see that in that first year, there were 6 children in care from Dorset who entered the justice system. And then the next 2 years, there were 3. The total number of children, not just children in care, but total numbers have dropped significantly. So it's good that the numbers of children in care have dropped as well. Obviously, when you're dealing with numbers as low as kind of 6 or 3, then in terms of percentages, it only takes 1 or 2, a change of 1 or 2 in the numbers to make quite a big impact on the percent. But I'm reassured by that, that downward trend. I've also talked a bit about offending and reoffending. So I've included some information in 13.1 in my report about what we call children in care receiving what we call substantive outcomes. So effectively what that means is a youth caution, a youth conditional caution, or some kind of court order. And again, you'll see that numbers have dropped, especially in the year to September 2020. So that's encouraging as well. And again, that's part of a trend that we've seen a lower number across the board, not just children in care, but it's good that it includes children in care. One of the concerns nationally has been that numbers entering the justice system and numbers in custody have dropped, but they haven't dropped as fast amongst children in care and amongst some other disadvantaged groups. So it's good to see that coming down, but we need to keep an eye on it. I've talked a bit about, in my report, about the way we work when we do have a child in care who enters the justice system and my service becomes involved with them. A couple of things we've added in the last couple of years are speech and language therapists. So we would undertake a speech and language assessment of those children and share it with other professionals. So that would be the social worker, obviously, but also care setting as well, to help them understand how best to communicate with the child. And we are also now trained in trauma-informed practice. And as we know, children in care may well have experienced traumatic events earlier in their life, which might have still have an impact on how they behave and present in their teenage years. So understanding that helps us give a better response to the child. I've mentioned in my report custody, and I said at the start that nationally there's overrepresentation of children in care in custody. I'm pleased to say that we haven't had any Dorset children in care remanded or sentenced to custody in the last 2 years, in fact, a bit more than that. So that's reassuring. I think that's the summary of my report, and perhaps I should stop there and see if there's any questions.
Thank you very much for that, David. Right, that was very interesting. Some interesting figures there. Can I open that up? Does anybody have anything they would like to bring up? Richard Biggs.
Yes, thank you. That's a really interesting report. I just wonder, when we had our own children's homes, sometimes there was an issue with the unions, and their view was somewhat different with the aim of, you know, how a family would react. You know, it was a health and safety issue. Someone was feeling threatened and assault, so the default would be to call the police, and that sometimes was against the sort of manager's advice. Obviously, with our shift to the Harbour project, etc., and possibly other units in Dorset, are we engaging, or are you engaging with the unions? Because it's probably more likely that our staff are going to be more perhaps unionised. Not saying there's anything wrong with that whatsoever. Just, you know, have you had discussions?
I can answer that partly, and Sarah Jane may want to add to it. The bigger, you're right, because that is a really important part of it, and we try to work in a way that is victim-led, generally in our response to offending. So the message we would be trying to give to staff is that we are not downplaying the importance and the significance of them experiencing harm in their workplace. That's a really serious thing. What we're saying is that there are ways of dealing with it and consequences that can be applied that don't need to go through the criminal justice system. And we would certainly try and promote restorative justice. That is underpinning the protocol. It's perhaps something that we could make more of. The idea would be that you'd want restorative approaches in the way that those homes operate, not just when you get a really serious incident, kind of wheeling out a restorative justice response, but as kind of embedded in the ethos of the institution, that when there's harm, it can be repaired, and we need to understand how the harmed party feels and what can be done to repair the harm. And with the Harbour project, I know that restorative approaches are a key part of the ethos for the workforce, and our practice manager in the youth offending team, who leads our work on restorative justice, is going to do some work with that workforce on embedding restorative approaches. So I think that addresses I hope that's our kind of response to recognising the importance of staff feeling safe and feeling that they're cared for by their employer, maybe without using a criminal route. But I realise I haven't explicitly addressed the question about negotiating with the unions.
No, I think that's very useful. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Andrew Kirby, Stella Jones, and then Ryan Holloway. So, Andrew.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Evening, and hello, David. Good to see you safe and well. Always a bonus in these times. So, I think one of the point of clarity. So obviously many of our children live outside of Dorset. So, I think my question to you is, how do we ensure that they are the children outside of Dorset aren't being unnecessarily criminalised? And then actually, there's a second part to my question, really. And you mentioned that that we're continuously adding properties where we've got where we've got children and that they're becoming known to you. So I think my question's also around the figures. Are the figures Dorset children? Are the figures Dorset children in care, or are the figures relate to children in care in Dorset? Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, yes. Yeah. So for the first part, I did it as I finished speaking at the start. I thought maybe I should have mentioned that, so I'm glad you've raised it. In theory, the protocol applies to our children that are placed out of area. And the National Concordat, which came in 2018, was aimed at trying to establish more consistency across different areas. But I don't think it works that well. So it really depends on the approach of the local police. So we obviously work closely with Dorset Police, and they really signed up to this. And we've got some particular colleagues in the police who really support this and make it work. We haven't got that direct contact with police forces elsewhere, and we do sometimes see children in care, Dorset children in care placed elsewhere receiving a justice outcome, and we think, well, if that had happened in Dorset, I don't think they would have got a youth caution or been taken to court. So there is some. So we've added our placement commissioners to our multi-agency group so that they can try to have, I suppose, a better understanding of the protocol and be more proactive about how they monitor that when they're agreeing a contract for a child to be placed in a setting outside of our local area. But there is still a limit to how much we can directly influence it. And the second part of your question was about the figures locally. So they relate to children in care living in Dorset and BCP. So it may be that they are a child in care from Dorset or from Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, but it could potentially be, although to be honest, it's fairly rare that it's a child from another local authority placed here.
So,
Right.
check.
Is that okay, Andrew? Do you want more?
Yeah, no, just purely then. So do we have the figures then for our children in care outside of Dorset?
We do, and it's possible I could interrogate the data a bit more closely. So it's some of that total number of children receiving a substantive outcome would include children who are placed out of area. So I haven't.
I think that would be really useful, because I know there's quite a large cohort of them, to see if because it's quite possible that they may be involved in the judicial system. So yeah, it's fine. I think my challenge is that we just need to ensure that our commissioning is right, and that we insist. I don't know if we can do that or not, that they follow our policies, but
I think and in theory we have case responsibility for children in care from Dorset, even if they live somewhere else. In practice, occasionally we find out later that they've received a justice outcome and been dealt with in, say, Wiltshire or Hampshire. Obviously, the kind of policy move to bring our children back to residing in Dorset will help with this issue.
yeah, it will. I think my one steer, sorry, Chair, is that if we could just somehow get some clarity and bring it together, so there's that consistency and we know which child is whom, and that if they're in Dorset, then they should, be treated in the same guise. All right.
Yep. I see exactly what you're saying, Andrew, and I think that it would be useful to drill down a little bit more on those numbers so that we know. But obviously, this drive to have our children all in Dorset will ultimately deal with that, won't it? In the meantime, the information, if the information is available and we've got it, it will be useful for us to know. Stella. You're on mute, Stella.
I thought I'd have moved. Yeah, it's good that the protocol is working well, or better, and we've got the speech and language people involved and psychiatrists. I just wondered about the 3 people who are in the justice system and any others that may be. court proceedings are being held up at the moment. Is this causing a problem for those youngsters?
You're right. The kind of speed of the justice system was a problem before the pandemic and has obviously been exacerbated by it. Locally, after the first lockdown last year, when courts were shut for about three months or so, we did have a backlog, which was delaying things. The backlog has been cleared locally, so we are seeing children charged with a offence and then given a court date 14 or 28 days later. So it has been a problem, but it appears to be resolving now.
That's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Ryan Holloway, Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just regarding going back to the graphs there, David, in regard to offences, is that data that you've provided us, is that figures for the entire Dorset County, or is that just Dorset alone, or does it include BCP figures as well?
I've tried to only provide Dorset figures if I can. So I think you're talking about the offences charts in
the offences
13.4.
Yes, sorry, I should have been more clarity there, but yeah, no, it's the offences chart.
So that's Dorset children, not BCP children.
Right. Okay. I say I do, as Councillor Stella Jones, I do welcome obviously bringing obviously speech and psychiatrists therapists involved in that as well. I think that is good news. That is as well. But I just wanted some clarity over those graphs, because I just wasn't sure if that included children in BCP area as well.
Yeah, it does. I realised with those graphs, the kind of key to them misses out the most recent year, which is shown in pink. And amongst those, there's a few instances of breaches of statutory order. So one of the things we've noted at times with children in care is we need skilled work to engage them. And if a child on a court order repeatedly fails to comply, so for example, fails to attend scheduled appointments, and we get to a point when we need to return them to court for breaching their order. So those numbers are kind of, to me, reassuringly low. That suggests we're engaging them, but we're still reviewing that and thinking, is there more we can do to make sure that we engage the child? Because often if that hasn't worked, we need to look at what we've done rather than holding the child responsible.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parry.
Thank you, Chairman. David, have you seen any changes in the attitude of the police towards their use of restraint on children in care? And in particular, has there been any changes of the use or potential use of tasers? Are children in care more likely than their peers to be subject to these sorts of uses of restraint?
To be candid, I'm not sure that I could answer that accurately. Haven't been made aware of significant use of. Well, I don't think I can recall being informed about the use of tasers or concern about restraint. In the past, we have, when I've analysed some of the offending by children in care, but also other children, it isn't unusual for an interaction between a police officer and a child about to lead to the reason for the interaction not proceeding, but the interaction itself becoming an offence. So the police officer stops the child for something, that doesn't turn out to be an offence, but the interaction is such that it ends up with the child being charged or cautioned for assaulting a police officer or obstructing a police officer. And so it can become quite heated. And the more our police are aware of speech and language needs, trauma history, and so on, and how that might inform the way a child responds to an authority figure confronting them, the better. So I think we've still got more work to do on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Jane, you wanted to come in?
Chair, thank you. And just really to offer some supporting information really to that David's provided. So it might be a bit out of order, but of sequence in the way that you've asked the questions, but just to be able to offer reassurance around the harbour and staff going into the harbour, but also our staff in general, our workforce across children's services and our foster carers. We are really committed to training our staff in a restorative approach, strengths-based practice, relationship-based practice, and being an ex-residential worker myself, I know what it's like to work in a children's home, to work with young people when things maybe are challenging for them, and how their behaviours are coming across in that space. And actually, it's what we as workers bring to them, and the way that we respond also helps us to be able to help them work forward. And I think working with David and his team as well, we're able to really identify those restorative approaches are really successful. But it's us equipping our staff to have the best resources that they have, the best training, the best support to be able to really support young people. So Councillor Biggs, your question around conversations with the unions, we're absolutely talking to our workforce and unions and everyone really about how we make those approaches. And a really good question from Councillor Kirby regarding our children who aren't living in Dorset. And quite right, we really want to bring all of our children home, and that's absolutely what our plan of direction is. But as David says, when children are out of county, and one of our challenges is that we don't always get information as quickly as we'd want to. We've identified that between ourselves and David's service, and trying to work together to make sure we've got those links into the authorities where our children are, to make sure that they get the same support as they would if they were in Dorset. And I think it's great, David, that you can add some more information into your report about children who are out of county. So just wanted to be able to offer some further clarification, really.
Thank you for that, Sarah Jane. I've got Councillor Cathy Lugg, and then Andrew, you want to come back in. Andrew Kirby. Councillor Lugg.
Hi, I just wanted to ask how the foster parents have reacted to this policy. They get into quite desperate situations with young people, and being told that they shouldn't call the police might present something of a problem to them.
We need to be clear about how we communicate the policy, and we probably need to keep doing that. So it's not saying don't call the police. We definitely think there are situations where the police do need to be called, and as I said, especially if that's immediate sort of risk of harm to someone sort of physically, or significant risk to property. So there are times when the police should be called. In my experience, I think foster carers are really skilled at dealing with a lot of these potential conflict situations without involving the police. And where we have seen a child come to our attention, so go through the justice system and come to my service for an offence in a foster setting, it's often actually not for a violent or damage type offence, but maybe for theft. So I can think of examples of using a foster carer's credit card, for example. But even then, we can still work restoratively, and the foster carers sometimes say, I don't particularly want the child to get a criminal record for this, but I do want them to understand the impact and to change their behaviour. So we can try to really sort of think creatively, but definitely recognising there should be safety for the foster carers and consequences for the child.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew Kirby.
Hi, David. Sorry, I should have started earlier by saying it's a really lovely paper. But I'm going to, and actually on that, guys, can I bring you to 15.2? Just looking at the addition of speech and language therapists. I think that's brilliant. I was just wondering if you could expand on that. I think, you know, it's part of the challenges. What are we doing to ensure that we're identifying those children with additional needs early? And are we sharing that work with things like in the educational sector? With our schools?
I welcome the opportunity to expand on that. It's so we used some money from NHS England. I made a successful bid for funding for this so they joined our service. We've got a 1.4, so a full-timer and someone who works 2 days a week in March 2018. So we're coming up to 3 years, and it's been quite transformative for our practice. So just within our service to start with, we would have said that we were good at engaging with young people that maybe other services struggled to, and there was evidence for us to think that. But we've really understood much better since those colleagues have joined our team the specific language and communication issues that a lot of the young people experience. And as my report says, they are assessing all young people that receive a court order and all young people that receive a second out of court disposal, plus others that get recommended to them. And the reason we ask them to assess everyone is that relying on a kind of screening by another professional to think that a speech and language assessment might be needed has been shown to miss lots of the young people that have speech, language and communication needs. So assessing everyone has led them to identify that 80% have got some level of need and 30% have got developmental language disorder, which is a really significant impairment. And in most cases, as you were hinting, I think, those deficits have not been identified in the education system. So we find, and I was talking with our speech and language therapist this morning, and they were, one was saying to me, she's had several parents say to her that they're frustrated that their child had to come to the Youth Justice Service to get these needs identified. Pleased that they have been identified, and we can really help the parents and family members as well as other professionals and the child in kind of responding to those needs. But obviously an earlier identification would be better and may well mean they don't end up in the justice system. And I guess there's also similar kind of potential correlation with children going into the care system. So I know that the Harbour project is actively trying to add speech and language therapists into the workforce there, into mirror what has been done in North Yorkshire, and that will be invaluable. We had a conversation at our YOS management board earlier in the week about it would be desirable, but obviously needs work to make it achievable, for us to include speech and language assessment as one of the stages when a child is facing an exclusion. So early, if things are starting to go wrong in school and maybe looking at fixed term exclusion, we would be looking for, yeah, I would say that speech and language assessment should be part of the response. And again, I would say it shouldn't rely on a professional who's not a speech and language therapist making a decision about whether that assessment is needed, because the evidence is that they don't spot them all. And in fact, our speech and language therapists say they don't always spot it. And they were saying today that girls can be particularly apparently verbally capable, and they've just completed an assessment on one girl who's been repeatedly arrested and had quite a troubled history, and she's fed up with people telling her that she's bright because she doesn't feel bright. And in fact, the language assessment showed that she's got really significant deficits, which wouldn't be apparent based on she is apparently quite fluent and articulate. So I probably could do with a bit of speech and language help to be more succinct myself, but so that's quite a long answer. But
that's really useful. And Chair, if I could just have a mini comeback.
Yes.
So we assess all children that come into care, don't we? So they have a health assessment. That's correct. Is it worth, say, for instance, putting in like a speech and language assessment? That would be my view. Any child that comes into care, so we can identify them early. No, that's what I would do. But thank you, and thank you, David.
I'd support that, but in building it into our service in the Youth Justice Service, I came across a few kind of issues. Obviously, it was a new world to me. One was obviously the resourcing and funding issue is significant, and that would be a barrier. Also, quite a lot of speech and language therapists are used to working with younger children, and finding speech and language therapists that were really confident and skilled at working with adolescents was a bit harder. We got some really good ones, and they're definitely out there. But I mean, that service has often been aimed often at preschool or primary school age children. So it's a developing area of work, I think.
I think that's something that I've just scribbled down, David and Andrew here, that it's something that we need to pick up very much sooner and start addressing sooner, because otherwise the communication problems compound themselves over time, don't they? Louise Smith, you wanted to speak?
Thank you, Chair. And it was just to add to both David and Councillor Kirby's comments there, and from the health team, the nursing team, they've had extra training sessions with the speech and language therapy team. And they have more knowledge now about the DLD, developmental language disorder, and are now making more referrals into the speech and language therapy team, which is a really good step forward. But we need to look earlier than that, before they're coming into care.
Excellent, thank you. CJ, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, does the police always get involved when a school's wanting to expel a child in care? Because I was wondering, a bit confused, like why you said you were involved in that sort of.
Yeah, sorry if I wasn't clear. What the police don't always get involved at that stage, but what I meant was that often the children that end up in trouble and having contact with the police and then coming to my service earlier in their life have been excluded from school. So some of the problems that have been shown at school can then lead to getting into trouble, breaking the law elsewhere. So what I'm thinking is that if we could deal with some of those problems earlier, ideally stop them being excluded from school, that would obviously be better for the child and would reduce the chances of them getting into trouble with the police.
Thanks. Does that answer your question, CJ? Yep.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you. Right. Does anybody else have anything for David? I don't have anything in my chat bar. So unless there are any other burning issues, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item 6, emotional health, well-being in schools, and a briefing. And this is Miriam, isn't it? Matt, did you want to come in first and then Miriam?
Thank you, Councillor Weller. I believe Mark Blackman was going to introduce this topic.
Right. Okay, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Weller. Just really to highlight, as David's actually just referenced, the genuine importance of addressing some of those issues of emotional health and well-being that our children in care have through their life experience. And Miriam in a moment is just going to, if you like, highlight the salient points for us around the work that we've been doing, both with the support of our Department for Education colleagues who've been funding the Health and Wellbeing in Schools project, but also that wider work that we're doing for our children who are the corporate parents, because what we want to be able to do is to evidence that we are moving our work forward in order to support them better. So Miriam has a very detailed report. It talks about the application of our strength and difficulties questionnaire work and digs into some of the detail around that. So obviously quite a lot to delve into. But if I come to Miriam for that sort of introduction and then invite questions from councillors.
Thank you very much. Miriam.
Good evening, everybody, and good evening, Councillor Weller. Yes, and no apologies actually for the length of the report. It is quite a long report, but what that demonstrates is actually the complexity of emotional well-being and mental health of children in care. And it's not simple, it's not straightforward. And there are lots of different sort of facets to it, which is what I've tried to capture. And I would say that actually I could have written a lot more and I've tried to summarize the key aspects of where we are at the moment and what our sort of key focus is as a local authority and how we're trying to improve the mental health and well-being. And it really is about well-being. If we think about well-being, that's where we need to start. And why is it important is in children in care, we know will have had life experiences which will have had an impact on their well-being, and that's why they're in care. And nationally, we know that about half the population of children in care have a diagnosable mental health condition. And that means that there'll be others that don't have a diagnosable mental health condition. That you have to have demonstrate that it's pervasive in your life and it's at a certain level and has persisted for a long time for it to be a diagnosable level. And also 2/3 of the population of children in care have an education, health and care plan. So that's a significant level that have special educational needs. And one of the categories of our education, health and care plan is social, emotional and mental health. So that's an area of need when we're looking at special educational needs. I was asked to sort of lead on some of this work and from September, and what it led me to do is to try and start to think about bringing together to really focus, and what I really think is fantastic that Dorset have done, is to say that emotional well-being of children in care is something to be identified as a separate strand of work alongside all other aspects of children in care. But when we're looking at well-being, it's really important that we look at it as a separate strand, because that has such a significant impact. And as David was rightly saying, it has a really significant impact on children, and it could lead to all sorts of poorer outcomes if we don't get it right at the start. So at the outset, we started to look at the different services. So when I go through I'm going to sort of just summarise some of the bits of my report, really. So starting to look and work at, and I love the bird that CJ just had on her on your head. So when we start to look at the range of services that we have working around together, so we have a children in care CAMS team who have equivalent to a full-time equivalent clinical psychologists that work into the fostering. They support the fostering team and the adoption team, and their service is very much what they would call a consultation service. So their work is to support the adults in the system, particularly the foster carers and particularly the adoptive parents, to understand the nature of the child that they have in their care. And that's sits within CAMS, but they work into us. The referrals are from our fostering team. And then we also have our CAMS social workers that also sit in our CAMS teams, and their caseload is managed through our CAMS services. So all the children that they work with are children who are in care. They have to be in care before they will become involved, and they do direct work, and their work is very much about supporting the young person at a level where they need quite a higher level of intervention. And then we start to think about the other sorts of areas of the services that are involved in working around emotional wellbeing. And we have a clinical psychologist who we seconded into our Dorset Council, and was seconded when we had a 0 to 12 team. So her work was very much directed from the 0 to 12 permanence team, and was about working with both at a consultation level and at a direct level with children, to inform care planning, to help understand what that child needed in terms of their care planning, and to make recommendations, and also to support us in looking at what therapeutic approaches were the most effective therapeutic approaches for children in care. And then when we start to look at the other workforce, we also have our educational psychology team, and all educational psychologists would work with children in care if they are a child in that school. And we have one psychologist who has some dedicated time to work with our virtual school, and to also work alongside developing practice and skills in the workforce, and is working with our harbour service at the moment as well. So we have 2 psychologists who are providing some support to the harbour service as it develops, before we go to appointing a full-time psychologist to sit within that team and be embedded in that team. So when we started to look at those different services, and we also have our children care nurses and the healthcare team, and we have a wellbeing practitioner in that team. And the wellbeing practitioner works at the earlier level prior to, say, our CAMS work, and has had a lot of training in early psychological interventions. And our healthcare nurses also have some support and do have work with children in care about their well-being. And the most important, one team approach, even though we might be sitting in different agencies, we have a one team approach and a pathway that sits consistently to look at actually who is the best person, who's the best practitioner. And the most important thing is to think about what that young person wants. So what we've been looking at is a number of the recommendations made by some expert reports, and what they have done is really look at the voice of the young person and think about what the young person wants, not always going straight in thinking it's a big problem. Actually, young people don't want us saying, oh, that's a huge problem and you need loads of intervention. They want us to be actually working with them at different levels. And thinking about that subjective well-being has different aspects to it. So there's the subjective aspect, which is the view of the young person's own view of their well-being. And then we can do objective measures, and that then leads us on to things like the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. And I've put some detail in my report about the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which is we report on that on an annual basis. So all children in care we are meant to take a measure of their well-being, and that's the government has asked us to use the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which is a simple questionnaire. It's a behavioural questionnaire, really, and it looks at different aspects of behaviour, which they then start to think that identifies things around emotional symptoms, conduct problems, hyperactivity, prosocial behaviours, and peer relationships. And by asking the foster carer to complete that questionnaire and also to complete some impact measure questions, it helps us to identify what level of need, mental health need there is in being indicated in that population. At the moment, we as a local authority, our completion rate is not great, and it seems to be going down. And I think, having done some trying to understand that, I think we have started to recognise that a lot of our workforce don't recognise the difference that our Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire can make. They don't understand it fully. And so what we've done is work really hard at pulling together a joint agency way of working using the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire and using it right at the outset. So not waiting till child in care has been in care for 12 months, but starting gathering that evidence at the beginning when a child comes into care, starting to look at those wellbeing measures. We have to use the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire at the 12-month point, so let's use it earlier. And let's take a measure then at 12 months again to see what difference we've made. So it has, by coming into care, has the support made a difference in the right direction? Because what it should help us to do is to identify what intervention might be needed early and the support that we can put in place early. And that could be simple things, can be small things, but also starts to unpick exactly what David was saying. It can help us also start to think about, are there some other things going on here? Is there indication here that there's some language difficulties? And so we're doing some work with our workforce to train them in using the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, and also with our healthcare professionals to support them in understanding that Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, and also improving their understanding by having consultations when a child has when they've completed a Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, having a consultation with an educational psychologist in that same area to start to ask questions. What does it tell us about that child? We're also doing some work on trying to develop some other measures to assist alongside the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. The expert witness report recommends that the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, as I've said, is a good starting point, but it doesn't give you a full picture. It's a behavioural measure, and it doesn't give you the feelings, the aspects, the child's feelings, their view of their own well-being, which, as I've said, is really important. And it doesn't necessarily give you other emotional aspects of that child. It's not a trauma, doesn't give you the sort of response to trauma. The other aspect of the report starts to look at education as well, and what we're doing in terms of education. And David alluded to that, and so did Mark, in terms of actually the need to work with our schools to identify children's needs earlier. And if we can do it with our children in care and get it right with them, we will be doing it for lots of children. And so we've been doing some work with the virtual school, and our educational psychology service are now beginning to lead on this. We've and with an organisation with Kate Cairns Associates, who did some training, and the Reese project, the Reese Centre, which is a research centre at Oxford University and funded by Alex Timpson. The research is funded by the Timpson Research Project, wanted to really look at what impact attachment aware approaches had on changing practice in schools. really looking at, does it change relationship-based approaches? Does it make a difference in schools? We've had 30 schools, so we started in 2018 with this intervention, and it starts with training, whole school approach training, because it's about changing the system. And our educational psychology service are leading on pulling together what we call a network of practice, and then using that to build on that to support all the schools, because every school has a link educational psychologist, and we're building the capacity in our team to be able to do that. And we're very fortunate in Dorset to be increasing the numbers of our educational psychologists. We currently have 13 full-time equivalents, and we are fortunate to have some more joining us within this next academic year.
Miriam, if I could dive in there.
Yeah.
I think thank you for that. I think what you've painted for us is a really clear picture, both in the report and in the narrative that you've given, that we are taking conspicuous care over not just our children in care, but that wider cohort of young people through the locality response that we've put in, but also in terms of the real digging into the detail, the other research pieces that are funded externally, and the support for our schools that is funded externally. So it's a system change piece that we've been talking about, and we now have really strong evidence that we are making an impact. And I wonder, Councillor, if it's appropriate to come to questions from colleagues in the room.
Thank you, Mark. Yes. I think the report was excellent. Thank you very much, Miriam, and some great content there. I've got a list of people wanting to speak. Can I jump in myself first, whilst I remember as much as anything else? You spoke about the strength and difficulties questionnaire at 12 months and bringing one forward a little sooner to try to up that rate. Is it too soon to make any assessment at how that's improved things?
So by doing it earlier, I understand what you're saying. So the recommendation, so what we want to do is take a baseline. So by using the strengths and difficulties questionnaire as a child comes into care, recognising that foster carer, so we would ask the parent as well, but we recognise that some parents, if their child is being taken into care, will be very reluctant to complete a questionnaire. But asking our foster carers to do that when they come into care, to take a baseline, and then at 3 months to take another shot, and then the next one would be in the 12 months. So doing a real kind of progressive measure of looking at how is this changing.
Thank you.
I think early days is the answer, Kate. Just more to come on that.
Yes, right. That's fine. It's good that we're addressing that. That's good. Right, Councillor Holloway, Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have kind of pretty much asked a similar question.
Sorry.
Ask really, but no, Miriam, thank you for your report. Very good report, and kind of reiterate what Councillor Weller's just said. It is good that we are looking at the SGDQ assessment. Sorry, got the wrong teeth in. But no, I am pleased that we are addressing and looking at that, because obviously that, as you know, that figure has declined since April by nearly 20%. So that to me was a little bit worrying. It was when I was obviously looking at those figures, but obviously, as you explained in your report, we are looking at it. That's good, and obviously, I welcome certainly, that you are bringing in more training for that, and obviously trying to help understand as to why those figures are like that, and obviously improvement on that is certainly welcoming news. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Andrew Kirby.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I sense a bit of a theme coming along now. So, Miriam, that was amazing. It was really lovely, which is brilliant, and I have very little to say on it. But going back to the SDQ scores, we know full well that Dorset, that our children in care have lower SDQ scores than nationally. So I think which may indicate actually that our children are unhappy and that they are sad. So I think my challenge is, well, why are our children potentially sadder in Dorset than they are nationally? Sorry, it's a bit of an awful. That was a bit of an awful one, wasn't it? Sorry.
No, well, no, it's an interesting. My hypothesis is kind of because we're not completing them fully on all our children in care, that when we are doing it, it's when there's a problem. So the strengths and difficulties questionnaire we're getting back they're inflated, yes, and they are. You're right. You know, they're a high score, which puts them in the higher range, and therefore they're a higher risk of having mental health difficulties or needing intervention and difficulties. So I would, argue that actually some of that would indicate that we haven't got it right in terms of that measure. We're not measuring the full cohort properly to get it to be able to really think about, are we intervening properly? I hope that answered some of your question.
Thanks very much.
Kate, I wonder whether Teresa wanted to respond.
Yes, I was just going to say the same thing. Teresa, did you want to come in at that point?
If I may, if it's not bumping other people, I'd be very grateful. And Councillor Kirby, thank you for a stellar question, because that is the key issue for us, really. What we've got to be absolutely certain of is that this is a really important process, and we've got to get the process right, absolutely. And Miriam's paper details really clearly how we're doing that. And I think Miriam's hypothesis is accurate in terms of if you only ask people who are in crisis how they're feeling, you're going to get a particular distortion. But I'm afraid I also think that actually some of our children are sadder than other children. And I think it's a very sad story because it's our story. They're too far away from home. There's too many of them in residential care, and there's too many of them that therefore not having contact with their important people and places. And so I think that all of those things are right, and I think it's important that we hold that complexity so we understand that actually our children are sadder. We've got to do more with that sadness and hold on to it. But Miriam's also absolutely right that it is about we have only been using it in crisis, and now we'll be using it more consistently to make sure that we've got a really good benchmark. But thank you for a great question.
Thanks very much for that, Teresa. Sorry, I've lost my place. Kathy. Councillor Lugg?
Chair, yep. Going on to the clinical psychologist's report, how do we measure what positive effect this is having on a child? Because if I read that report, the satisfaction ratio is more from the social workers, not the foster carers, and we've only had a response from one child. I would like some sort of more accurate information about how it's actually making a difference to our children.
Yeah, and that's a very good question, Councillor Lugg, very good question. That's some work that we are doing with our clinical psychologists, and it's a challenge. It's that we've been asking that question of them since we've started working more closely around, because and I think one of the and I'm sure Louise might well agree here, is that NHS England tend to ask for numbers. So they want to know numbers of children seen, waiting times, and that's what they report on, and that's what they're used to reporting on. So what we are doing is working with them on looking at goal-based outcomes, and saying even if you do a one-off consultation, you can measure whether if you ask a question at the start of what do you want to achieve by this conversation, by this consultation, what will be different as a result of you talking to me now? And at the end of that consultation, then asking, has it improved? Have you got what you needed? Where are you now? So we're going to start to introduce that. It's work in progress. And also do that work with our young people. Do the same thing with the young, you can do it with the young people too. So if you're doing direct work with young people, you should be asking them that same question, and asking them, has it made a difference? And as you rightly say, consultation. So the consultation work that our clinical psychologists do with foster carers, that is a question that we're asking our fostering team, is how do you know that the work that our clinical psychologists are doing are making a difference to the child? they're making a difference, and the reports are really clear that actually our foster carers, we need to support them. We need to support their mental health as well, and make sure that they are supported, and we're containing that. But we also need to make sure the work we're doing is having an impact on that child.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Miriam. Thanks, Kathy. I've got Anne, and then Richard, and then Stella. Teresa, if she wants to come back. We're now just a minute outside our schedule, so if we can try to catch up a little bit, that would be great. But please do ask the questions that you need answers for. Anne.
Hi Miriam, it's great to hear about all the intervention, early intervention work and everything. I'd just like to, I don't hear a lot about the other end of the scale, the care leavers. It's too late for them, they're not going to benefit from that early intervention work. What work is going on? Are they getting the short end of the straw? Because they have just as many mental health problems and issues as the younger children, I feel.
Yeah, that's a good question, and so we focus on what we need to do first. But care leavers are certainly part of the work, and the healthcare team, the nurses are working with the healthcare. They're now commissioned to work with our care leavers as well as children in care, so that's a good starting point. Our service, like the educational psychology service, would work up to 25. So we would work with all that with that age group, and we're working very much with Simon Frose-Brown around the care about how we can identify services to support care leavers, making sure we get it right for you as young people. You know, making sure that we're not assuming that we know what's right for you, because at that age you know what is going to work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does that help, Anne?
Yes, yeah. I just wanted to give the voice for that end of the scale as well.
We haven't forgotten them.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Councillor Biggs, Richard.
Yeah, we've heard an awful lot about the process, a lot of the theory behind it, the work that's being done. I think as a corporate parenting board, and perhaps to pick up on what Kathy Lugg said to some extent, we've got to cut through that. We've got to see what the benefit is and the results and how that's going to be shown to us. That's great, but we're not academics. Well, I'm not anyway. We really want to know how we're going to measure that success. Is it just going to be, that one measure of happiness? That seems to be, there needs to be something more than that for us to sort of get those non-tangible benefits. How are you going to, I suppose, show those surveys and the detail to us in a way that we can actually measure success over a matter of years? Obviously, it's not something that's done overnight. Thank you.
And you're right, and I accept that completely, that we haven't in terms of my report, there's a lot of detail in it, but there's not loads of figures actually in terms of impact, and that is something. So what we're looking at is what things make it, if we're measuring well-being, what are the things that we would need to draw on? So it would be our things like fixed term exclusions, attainment, permanence. If a child belongs and they feel like they belong, which is a really good sign of well-being, then they will stay in that home. Those links are really important when we're measuring. So what we need to do is draw those links to those things and make sure we are reporting on those, as well as reporting on specific other aspects around well-being. We're pulling together a reporting framework to be able to try and say these are the things that we need to measure in order to be able to present to you, as you say, as a parent. If we were parents, what would we want to see that's different for this child? And that's what we need to be thinking about as a parent. How will I know my child is okay? How will I know they're better? How will I know that they've got the right service?
Thanks, Miriam. Councillor Jones, Stella.
Yeah, going back to the SDQ, if we're not actually using them very often, and when we use them, we're not using them to plan for each child, hopefully that's going to change. I'm very concerned, where do we get the real voice of the child when they're making up the plans? In your report somewhere else, it says that 50% of children in care don't even know why they're in care nationally. Now, this is a worry, because if they don't know how they're in care, why they're in care, how are we going to solve their psychological problems, maybe? Is this the same in Dorset, that there are children who do not know why they're in care? And in that case, how do we help them to make their plans?
I think I hand some of that over back to Matt, because I know Matt is doing some work about, so life story work is really important, and we really recognise that is really important. And sense of agency is one of the biggest things. Having a sense of agency over your life is really critical for young people. And you're right, so life story work is critical. Life story work doesn't have to be, that has to be done by the person who's got the best relationship, and we need to be identifying who that is. And I've worked actually in the past with a teaching assistant or a pastoral worker who's been doing that life story work, being with that young person, because they're the best person to do it. They've got that relationship, and the significant difference that makes it's huge. I know Matt's been doing some work around life story work. I don't know whether, Matt, you want to come in.
Matt, did you want to come in there?
Thank you. Only just to add, absolutely, this is about relationships and having the right people in place. We've looked at our new structure, that the moving of social workers is less. So, our children are building those relationships with their social worker, with their foster carers. Later on, we'll discuss some of our permanency rates. So all of those are contributing factors to really our children getting to know us and us getting to know them, and really getting them to understand their journey with us, and we're very much alongside them. So there's a lot more work to come, and we continue to work towards it. It's not perfect, but we have definitely got a strengthening services plan that will get us there. I just wanted to add that. I know we pushed for time, but thank you.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much. Teresa, you wanted to come back in?
Yes, thank you. Because again, a really important debate and discussion. So we do hear children's voices in a range of ways. The issue with the SDQ, and you're right, Richard, it's not only an intellectual tool. It does give us a kind of an ability to compare like with like, both in terms of our own children and in terms of the country, because it asks those very set questions, which is really important, and it's crucial that we do that work. But actually, we hear our children's voices in a range of ways, and I just saw a beautiful letter from one of our young people about one of our social workers, talking about how that young social worker, it was actually feedback for her portfolio as part of her assessed year as a newly qualified social worker. Lovely, lovely report in terms of how that young person had felt held and supported by their social worker. But one of the big indications for us, and we're looking at working up our impact outcomes at the moment, and the big impact for us is if young people throughout their time with us in care are feel supported and have their emotional well-being taken care of, they'll actually be able to form loving relationships. We don't talk about love a lot in this business, but we need to talk about it more. We need to really edge towards having loving relationships in the care that we provide, and looking for loving relationships in our young people's future. Yes, they'll also be able to be more successful in work and education and training. Yes, they'll also have better health outcomes, because the two are really, physical health outcomes are really closely linked. So we will absolutely look at all of those, but we'll also begin to talk much more about being able to maintain loving, caring relationships.
Thank you. Thank you. So, that was terrific, Miriam. Thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry that it seemed to be a bit rushed at the end there, but it was important that we did fulfil that. Mark, did you want to come back at all? Are you happy at the moment?
No, very content, thank you.
Lovely. Oh, what that's even better. Wonderful. Thank you. Right. Item 7. Claire, are you there still? I saw you a few moments ago. Claire Shields.
Hi everybody. Thank you, Councillor Weather. Just wanted to introduce a really important report which went to Cabinet this week as well, and Stuart's going to talk us through, give us an overview of some of the detail. Really important links to all of the conversations we were having this evening about keeping our children close and keeping them at where we can in Dorset, so that we can provide all the services and the support that we want to be in the right places for us. So Stuart, I will hand over as our Head of Commissioning, and Stuart's going to talk through the placement sufficiency strategy.
Lovely, thank you, Claire.
Okay, thank you, colleagues and councillors. You'll remember that we brought last year an outline sort of sufficiency approach to you, just talking about the sort of things that we thought needed to be in a sufficiency strategy. And the feedback that we got from you was positive, but you were wanting to see more in the way of targets, more firm plans. So we took that on board. And so what we really wanted to do was to start to say, where do we want to be? Where do we want to be numbers wise, budget wise, and build out the plan from there. So if you look right at the start of the report, we just took two fairly basic measures. Are we taking children into care at the same rate as our statistical neighbours? So can we stop being an outlier and start being an authority where the number of children coming into care is more reflective of our demography? And then the second really important thing was to bring the number of children, or the percentage of children in care who are placed outside of our local authority borders more into line with our statistical neighbours. So at the moment we send something like 40% of our children outside of the Dorset area, and you know, that's much worse for young people who need residential care, because we've got so little in Dorset. It's virtually a guaranteed trip out of Dorset if you need that particular service. So we looked at what those figures would be like and looked at how long it would take to get there. So we think that it will take time to get our number of children in care in total down to an optimum level. We've got a lot of children in the care system who've been there for a long time. They're settled, they're in permanence. They're not going to go anywhere else quickly, but we are developing services which will ensure that we can support more families to look after their children, either with birth families or with extended families. So we're putting into place the preventive services. So we think our overall number of children in care will reduce over the next few years by about 30 per year. But in terms of what would we need to do in Dorset to start enabling more of our children to live in Dorset if they live in care, we think that in the next year we'll need 50 extra placements in Dorset. So we've broken that down. We've looked at what we know is in the pipeline in terms of children's homes places that either we're building ourselves or where we're in conversations with providers in the private sector to run children's homes for us. So we've got a figure there that we think we can get between 25 and 30 beds by the end of the year. We've got a target that we've put in there by the end of next financial year for additional fostering places for children in Dorset, and we've also put in a target for additional fostering places with independent providers. And that's an important one for us, because there are a lot of foster carers in Dorset who are looking after children who don't come from Dorset. So if we and other local authorities are trying to make more sense of that and look after our children, you know, where they come from, then we should be trying to get more access to those foster carers in Dorset. So those were the sort of headline figures. Where do we need to go overall in terms of the number of children in care, and what are we going to set ourselves as targets for the particular sorts of additional places that we're going to get? And then the other thing that we've been looking at is older teenagers, some of whom live in what's called unregulated provision. So this might be supported housing or hostel type accommodation. We've got quite a large number there. We've probably got too many 16 and 17-year-olds in that sort of accommodation, but there are there are probably still some young people for whom that's the right fit, but we've got to do something about the numbers there. It's also an issue which has caught the attention of government, and they've looked at how that whole area of provision can be regulated better. You know, a lot of supported housing at the moment is unregulated, but that's fine because it's adults living there with minimal support needs. Perhaps they need somebody coming around to sort of talk about bills or with advice about managing their home. But for our young people particularly, they've got more in terms of trauma, in terms of you know, their personal needs, perhaps more crisis still happening in their lives. So they need higher levels of support. So the consultation is finished now, but what the government proposed was a scheme of regulation for supported housing for 16 and 17-year-olds and other vulnerable young people. So the components of that regulation would be that all of those people who are providing that sort of accommodation would have to have a statement of purpose. They'd have to meet certain standards in the nature of the accommodation, you know, the physical, the physical makeup of the accommodation. They would need to have good standards in terms of who they recruited to provide support and safeguard, and they would need to ensure that they were able to deliver a proper support offer to those young people. So we think that that's likely to be enacted. We don't get the sense that the regulation will go further initially, but I think there's a general consensus that some form of stronger regulation is needed. So we'll be going out to tender for that accommodation again. There's an existing contract which comes to an end this year, and that historically was managed by adult services. And we've had the conversation with colleagues in adult services and said that actually young people's housing needs to be led by children's services. And we've also got some of our own framework arrangements for supported housing as well, which we set up to make good the shortfall in what was commissioned overall. So we'll be putting those two pots together and looking to get a refresh of supported accommodation. So we want providers who are who wish to continue to look after younger teenagers and more vulnerable teenagers. We want those people to be signing up to the regulatory framework, and they need to say that they're prepared to do that. Some of those providers will actually go the whole hog, I think, and probably just decide to register their provision as a children's home. And I think others will say, well, actually, you know, we're a housing association. We've got a lot of general needs stock. Some of that's occupied by young people. We've got a floating support scheme. That's where we want to be in the business. We don't want to be running high support type accommodation. So that's that element there. Going further down the report, and I won't stay too long on this now. We've just detailed some of the very specific developments that we've got, and we can take questions on those. But obviously the big one is the harbour project, which is a big capital project, but also a really important change in approach in how we work with young people, and particularly how we work with young people either on the edge of care or young people who are experiencing disruption in their care experience. So that's a whole approach about working alongside young people, working alongside families, putting in flexible support, and really being focused on either keeping children at home or being able to support them in foster parent placements or and really using residential care as an intervention, never as a long-term home. So the new children's home that we're building in Dorchester Road will probably be for medium-term stays, but 45 Dorchester Road, the idea will be that if you need to go in there, you won't go in there very long, because as soon as you land, we're planning either how you can go back to your family or how we can start to introduce you to some foster carers. So it's a really exciting project and a really strong evidence base. That's the other thing. We're building on good practice and a proven methodology that other authorities have used very successfully. We're also going to develop some other DC properties and convert those into children's homes. So that will be good as well. So we'll start to inhabit the area in Weymouth, and we'll start to be able to offer young people services and homes near to where they live. We've got some work to do around our fostering service in terms of modernising that and increasing the number of Dorset Council foster carers that we have available for children in Dorset. And we've also got some work that we're doing, as I mentioned earlier, with the private residential sector to see if we can attract more of those to deliver children's homes accommodation in Dorset. So I'll stop there and we'll take any questions that you've got.
Thank you, Stuart. That's very interesting. For me, that throws up far more questions than than we could possibly go through at this stage, I think. And I think that a pattern that's arising is that we have far too much on our agendas to properly drill down to the answers that we want ever. And I think that that's something that clearly I'm going to have to discuss with Matt and Sarah Jane and Teresa at some time, I'm afraid. Sorry, don't frown at me, but I think that there are certainly questions there. Just the statement that, or the idea that a 16-year-old can live with minimal adult intervention fills me with horror, to be honest, because even the most self-sufficient and mature 16-year-old needs a huge amount of support, both mentally and socially and in every other way. So there are lots of questions there, but I have other people who I'm sure will ask those questions much more astutely than I will. So I've got CJ first and then Councillor Jones. CJ.
But I was wondering, when you said that children are, I think you said that children aren't, that are, sorry, oh, how do you say it? Like children that aren't like stereotypically English or, or of different religion, not religion, like aren't from England with other, with like foster parents down here. I was wondering, do you mean as in they are obviously from a different, country, or also out of their county? So, we have children that are ours, but they're out of county. So I was wondering if you meant they're with a different county and they're with us.
Absolutely. Just as we'll have a number of children who say are living in Bournemouth or Yeovil or Salisbury, equally those foster carers in Dorset that are run by independent fostering agencies will have children from Somerset, Hampshire, Wiltshire, probably further afield as well. But it's what I'm talking about is children who are the responsibility of other local authorities. And it's just that crazy situation where we have to place some children outside of Dorset, and then there's other local authorities placing their children outside of their boundaries in Dorset. So it's a bit of a mixed up, muddled up marketplace, really. And yeah, what the whole point of the strategy is, we need to make sure we've got enough places in Dorset for Dorset children.
Okay, CJ. Councillor Jones, Stella.
Yeah, 2 points. First one was what you related to, the 16-year-olds onwards and accommodation. We have a duty of care up to 25, and yet we don't seem to have any figures of what happens after 21. We've even got some who don't stay in care until over 18. It'd be nice to have more details about what are we doing for these people and how we follow up to the age of 25. So can I leave you with that to give me an answer later, maybe? But I'm really concerned. The whole strategy is what we want to do is to stop children being in care for very long or even going into care at all. And that relies on 3 plans: the Strengthening Services Plan, the Children and Young People's Plan, and the Corporate Parenting Strategy. Now, how are these going to be? These are, if our targets are going to be met, these have got to work well. How are they going to be monitored? Who's going to scrutinise them? Will they be coming back to this committee or where? Because we need to keep an eye on all these 3, otherwise we're not going to get any achievements.
Thank you, Stella. Andrew Kirby.
Can I have some answers, maybe?
Oh, sorry, Stella. I think Teresa is ready to give you some answers there.
Do you want to go to Director Levy and then I'll come back in?
Yes, certainly. Teresa.
Thank you very much. Yeah, absolutely. So Stella, you're absolutely right. These are huge developments. They are pivotal to our wellbeing outcomes for our looked after children. So we will be expecting to bring them both to scrutiny committees on a regular basis around the delivery and the outcomes of. Absolutely regularly here. If you look at the kind of detail that's in Stuart's report, and you're right, of course, we could bring much more detail, and we must now look at those 16 to 25s and bring a kind of separate piece around young people's outcomes. But in terms of our sufficiency plan, how many places we've got for how many children in the right places, we should regularly bring it here, and we should also bring it to scrutiny and potentially Health and Wellbeing Board in terms of that wider piece around housing and future stability for those young people. Because, you know, I agree with both of you, there's no way any one of us would want to see any 16-year-olds in anything other than, you know, family life, family care, and some sort of, you know, real meaningful care. And, you know, we all know up to 18, it's still highly questionable. Those are the legal frameworks we're working within, but doesn't mean that they're our ambition. So yes,
Thank
both
you.
places, I think, Councillor Jones.
Thank you. Matt, you wanted to speak?
Thank you. I just wanted to add as well that as part of our forward plan, there is obviously our annual review for care leavers that will be shared with the board moving forward, and certainly updates around corporate parenting strategy. That's something that will be done at every formal meeting moving forward. So hopefully that offers some reassurance that the board will have oversight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for Stuart? Can't see anything there, so I'm going to assume not, and hope that we can slow.
Oi, Chair.
Oh, sorry, Andrew.
It's all right, Chair. I still love you. Just going back to, I think it's a point that I raised before, and it's one of my great frustrations is that we have a real lack of foster carers in Dorset, and that's reflected in the figures. And now, when I speak to people and I say, well, why are you not a foster carer? 90% of them turn around and say it's because we don't have the space. We in this council have the ability to change that, and that can be reflected in our housing policies. And that's come to me, and it's come to my committee, but yet that's not reflected in the in the item here. So why not?
Who wants to answer that? That's a can of worms, isn't it?
Well, it's something that we've mooted and we've talked about to with colleagues in the past, because it's absolutely right where there's a new estate being built, and it's actually something that we've dealt with in Building Better Lives when we've been looking at some of those developments about whether or not some of the housing could be made available for foster carers to enable them to move into that accommodation. But we're also talking to our colleagues about the Dorset plan. So starting really to look at that long-term plan for populations, housing need, and all the rest of it. So obviously, some of it that is large scale population stuff. It's about where new schools will be and things like that. But we can also weave into that plan, and we're only at the early stages of engagement with that, the need for the sort of housing that can enable larger families and foster families to provide. I think we've also had conversations in the past with some of the larger social housing providers as well about whether we can get foster carers moved into larger accommodation and things like that. But obviously, there's some complexities there around housing allocation that we'd have to work through.
Thanks, Stuart. Councillor Parry, CJ, I'm going to ask Teresa to come in next in case she's got something that is relevant to what we've just said, and then bring you both back in for your questions. Teresa.
Thank you. Yeah, so Stuart's absolutely right. Our longer term piece is around looking at that local plan, looking at the housing allocation being prioritised in foster carers too. We have got opportunities, and we've always got opportunities to bring forward any capital bid requirements, because you've got the issue about most people, you know, maybe don't want to up sticks, they actually want an extension. And many of us for many years have done schemes around paying people to have extensions, and we all know that there are some pitfalls in there that can be really challenging and really difficult, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't enter that space of difficulty. So if in any way we think that's something that genuinely is stopping people, you're right, one of our kind of knock you out questions when you're first applying to be a foster carer is, do you have a spare room? And we could look at that as part of our fostering policy with the fostering review. Yeah, absolutely. It is a little bit of a minefield, as you'd all appreciate why, when people start taking charges on people's properties and all those sorts of things. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't kind of venture into it and manage the difficulty.
It is also rather quicker than waiting for a new housing estate to be built, isn't it? So it is something that we need to be looking at perhaps a little bit more.
Put the mower in. What about we do a really nice conversion on your garage, which is the only thing you keep in it? And we make that a really nice room as a foster, somewhere for a foster child to be accommodated. We don't have those conversations as a rule. I think we need to make sure we're in the space where we can have those conversations. The other thing I wanted just to reflect on, which was mentioned in Cabinet yesterday, was the second part of what was applauded last year as Dorchester Road, because the funding for Dorchester Road came in two parts, really. There was the new build, but actually there was also the care leavers accommodation element to it. And for the first time yesterday in Cabinet, we spoke, you know, that was very much documented in the paper and the direction we're going on there. And that is a very serious commitment that we did make and we are honouring. And I just wanted to make sure that we were all aware of the significance of that yesterday. It was a great place for us to get to.
Thank you, Andrew. That's excellent. CJ?
I was just wondering is also, because obviously, you know, some people, as they said, like they might not have the space, but also I was wondering if some people might not believe they'd be allowed to, like of the situations they may, like if they're young or, you know, they're not earning as much as money as, you know, you'd expect, so they may think, oh, I can't be a foster carer because of this.
Yeah,
So
no, you're absolutely right. And a lot of what we do with our fostering recruitment and our advertising is just to do the myth busting. So obviously we will, you know, in our imagery, we'll show diverse families, single parents, same-sex couples, things like that. So, you know, we really want to get the message across that all sorts of people can care for children at all sorts of ages. And I think the other thing that we do is that we make sure that when people express an interest, we don't ask lots of questions right at the start. We ask 2 or 3 key questions. But if you phoned up and said, I'm interested in being a foster carer, and then somebody asked you detailed questions for half an hour, you might think, well, this is just the start. Is it always going to be like this? So just get some key questions, make sure they've got the basics there. You know, they're not an axe murderer, they've got a spare room, things like that. And then you can go into the detailed conversations and explore about actually what sort of contribution they can make, and how they could offer a home to children.
Yeah.
Thank you. CJ, I want to move on to Sarah Jane, because then I'd like to move on to the next the next agenda item, if that's okay. Sarah Jane.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, CJ. You gave me a fabulous opportunity there to give a big shout out to our fostering campaign, which is currently ongoing at the moment. So we're really reaching out to extend our fostering family, as you know, and all of the things that Stuart's just talked about should be in that campaign. And I'd just really encourage us all to check it out on social media, share it as you can, and just get involved. And particularly for members, we really want you to be involved. So just keep an eye out for it. But thank you to CJ. You set me up really nicely there. That was great. Thank you.
Great double act. Thank you. Sorry, I forgot Councillor Lugg. Sorry, Kathy. Of course you can speak.
Thank you. I think as councillors, it's down to us to make sure that the local plan includes this provision for our young people. I'm quite interested in us having a more robust conversation with housing associations, because I'm aware that there are a number of families who are fostering family members who that family member is having to sleep on a sofa, and this can go on for 18 months, 2 years, and they're still no further into being rehoused. So I think a conversation with them is imminent.
Great, thank you very much for that. Right, where are we on this list now, apart from way over time? Are we on item 8, Matt?
Thank you. Sarah Jane, do you want to introduce it, or are you okay for
Well,
me
Matt,
to?
I think you can just go ahead, and
Thank you.
I'm confident that Matt will be able to bring agenda 8 and 9 together, really, to give you a
Right.
good overview of where we're at. So that's great. Thank you.
If you'd like to do that, Matt, that's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you. Just bear with me. I would like to share my screen, and the next item which we'll be bringing up is the corporate parenting strategy.
Thank
But
you.
before, well, if you just bear with me while I bring it up, and it's should work perfectly. Can everybody see that? Councillor Weller, can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Perfect.
That's
Thank you.
lovely.
This strategy was created and co-produced with our, with participation people, with children in care councils, and I'm just really proud of it, and it's something that I would like to bring and focus on key elements of our ambitions for our children in each of the formal meetings moving forward, just so that the corporate parenting board members are really sighted on progress that's being made, any areas that we really need to drill down into to improve and focus on, so that we achieve our objectives, basically. There will obviously be a period later in the year where we look to review it, and I'm really looking forward to getting our children in care and care leavers, Hannah and CJ, for example, and others to really look at how we can develop and refine this moving forward. So today, I know that we're all aware of our 6 priorities and ambitions for our children, as parents, as corporate parents for them. But I thought today, just in terms of time, we'd really focus in on 3 of them, and obviously we'll look at others moving forward. So the first one I wanted to really discuss with everyone is point 1. And for me, this isn't just about, point 1, just so you can see, is increasing opportunities to hear the voice of children. And I've heard that, and young people, and I've heard that through our corporate parenting board today, and I've heard it in other meetings. But it's more than just having these children care councils, for example. I'm really glad to see CJ and Hannah attending today and looking at how we can get other young people involved, and how we then get that into our informal meetings, and how we co-produce informal corporate parenting board meetings moving forward. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that's going to be taking place moving forward. I think we are in a good place, and there's a bit more work to be done there. You know, we also have, I know our councillors and other DC staff, Dorset Council staff, attending activity days. I know that we're a little bit hampered with the current pandemic, but it's really good to see that drive where we want to get involved and get to know our children, that are in our care. And for me, we're really starting to see that now, considering the challenging year that we've had, and I'm really, proud to be working with CJ Hannah and others in various councils to improve that. I think what we have got coming up, I know that we've got coming up, is our annual survey, which should be really, really good. It's obviously we had a session yesterday evening about it, and we're encouraging everyone really to get as wide a response as possible. It's a really good thing to get our Dorset Council Children's Annual Survey back, because it's learning for us and how we can improve moving forward. So watch this space, and we should be having that come through quite shortly. The next one that I really wanted to focus on today is just to follow on really from what we've heard from Miriam, and it's really about children in care and their mental health and well-being, and how we improve access to it. Now, there's a number of positive things. I know that the board are well started on some of the challenges we have, and there's clear plans that we've heard from Miriam, for example, on how we can improve our strength and difficulties questionnaire data, and how we get that out to our staff, for example, and our young people to really improve things for them. So I won't go through all of the strengths there, but what I'd like to point out that the areas that we're focusing on, the training for our staff is so important. Training for our foster care so they understand the importance of it. We are looking at refining the processes into our mental health services, and also in terms of accessing, for example, our initial health assessments. As we know, there's been some issues of late, and we've looked at really refining the process, which I'll get into a little bit more on the next portion, if that's okay, where I really look at the focus on the data. In terms of point 4 of our priority, let me just get that. I'm hoping you can all still see this. And this, to me, I'm really passionate about, the stability of accommodation, and really looking at all options in terms of our permanence. And something that was alluded to earlier, permanence isn't just about a physical location. There's the legal sense of permanence, the emotional sense of permanence, that all filter into making absolutely the experience of our young people the best it can be. There's a lot of work going on at the moment in terms of training for our staff, for example, around permanency planning. We're also working with transitions into adulthood to improve our joint housing protocol, as you can see there. The new harbour project that the board is well started on, and will continue to have oversight of that moving forward. All really important stuff. That the permanence panel that I've referenced previously, really important. Fortnightly meetings where we absolutely know our children, know their plans, and where appropriate, we're looking at reunification, to parents or someone with PR, really nailing down into the long-term fostering, if that's an option, really robustly looking at, should this be a special guardianship situation, all of those things. And, as well as adoption, for example, or staying put for our older children. So there's a lot of work that I'm really excited about. The areas, though, that I think we need to focus on, and I know that we've got a bit of a spotlight on it at the moment, family group conferences, for example, and that ties into, I'm sure you've all heard me talk about those lifelong links, those links within the community that really support our young people to be part of the communities that they're living in and local to Dorset. So I know that there's a lot of work going on around that. I've mentioned already about refining some of our processes that I'm hoping to go live fairly shortly. We just need to get it signed off. So there's a lot of work going on there. Councillor Weller, I'm more than happy to move on to what I think we're doing well as an overview from the data pack that has already been sent, or should I pause just to take some questions around what I've just said?
I've got nobody indicating a burning issue to ask you any questions at the moment, Matt. So do you want to continue? And then if people do want questions, they can come in.
Okay. Brilliant.
You've got the flow going, so keep going.
Perfect.
And I'll
Just
bring
trying to get us
people in.
back on time.
No, that's great. But well, it's important, so take what time you need. But
Thank you.
I'll keep a check on the chat.
Thank you very
line.
much. No worries. So just moving on then to the data packs that you've all received. What I'm trying to do in our formal meetings, or even in our informal meetings, is really focusing in on, what we're doing well, or what I think that we're doing well, so that you're started on that, but also some of the areas that we need to have a bit more scrutiny on. So today, just to carry on with the permanence theme, I think what we're doing really well in Dorset, and where we continue to strengthen it, is our permanence. In November we had 88 of our children in our care for 4 months or more having permanence plans. There's a lot of things that we're doing now in terms of dip sampling and auditing to really make sure that children, that once they're in our care, their permanence plans are being progressed. And I'm hoping to see the impacts of that in our next corporate parenting board. A lot of work's gone into that. We've also looked to upskill our staff. So we've got training that's being done specifically around the different pathways that we have to achieve permanence for our children, which again has started and will continue over the coming weeks. So really exciting times. It's really been quite good. One of the benefits of, I guess, the pandemic is that we're using digital technology better, so we are reaching a wider audience, which is great. In terms of what we're doing with our staff as well, that absolutely the message has landed, that permanence is key for our children in care, and we need to be ambitious and work hard to ensure that there's no lack or drift, and recording our decision making around permanence. In terms of the panel, I've alluded to that earlier. We have a fortnightly panel as well, which is a really good opportunity for not only us as a management group, but also other parts of the organization. So, for example, virtual schools attend. We've also got our child and care psychologists that attend to really have scrutiny and oversight of some of the plans that are being presented to our children, for our children in care. For example, looking at cohorts of children that are in residential, or children that have only recently come into our care, to absolutely make sure we're tracking that through. We've also had some improvements in terms of our QAROs, previously known as IROs, and their oversight and scrutiny of the plans, which is good to see as a critical friend element. In terms of the positives, in the data pack, you'll see that our approval for special guardianship orders, again, is increasing, which is a good trajectory. And also we saw, it is a good trajectory, and we're working well with Aspire currently. We've also developed and refined our flowchart, so just to improve the process and make sure that our newcomers into Dorset, we've got a number of new staff, which is a really good thing for us as an organisation to have permanent members of staff, are well started and have up-to-date information as to our processes. Just moving on then, and it's a little bit of a jump, but it ties in with the themes that we've seen today. In terms of our care leavers, and it's a shame Simon isn't here today, but a lot of work has gone into how we keep in touch with our care leavers. In November it was at 95%, and we are absolutely aware of the children that haven't wanted to access that, and we're logging the decision making around that. It's not that and we continue, to try to stay in contact with them. Some of the areas that I think we need to be aware of, and there's a lot of work going in to improve. We've all heard about and seen and been cited on the initial health assessments. A lot of work has gone in to absolutely change the position we're in. So, for example, we've streamlined processes during the pandemic to make sure that we're getting the consents in on time, so that we're not delaying the initial health assessment for our children in care. And I'm hoping to see the benefits of that in the coming months as the reports start coming through. We've held workshops with our staff to absolutely make sure that newcomers and even those that have been around a while are absolutely aware of the importance of initial health assessments and the timeliness of them, and the processes that are needed to make sure that they're done in a timely way. We've also introduced and refined our escalation process. So when things are going astray within 48 hours, I'm aware of that, and then feeding that through to make sure that we're back on track. The other thing that I'm quite proud of, and we're just test piloting at the moment, is our notification process and really streamlining that. So as soon as a child is coming into our care, we're aware of it on the day, and that's being done behind the scenes with our Mosaic colleagues. In terms of something that we need to be focused on as well is our pathway plans for our 16 plus children. In November, sadly, they were sitting at 59%. And I know that in reviewing some of those plans, there is a real rich conversation that's going on. However, that's not where we want to be as an organization. And I think with the second team manager now being appointed, I'm hoping to see significant improvement as we move forward. I'm not going to go on again about the strength and difficulties questionnaire. It's something that obviously we're well sighted on, and that's just because of time. That was what I really wanted to focus on, and I'm hoping we found this useful. Does anyone have any questions?
I've got something I'd like to ask, but I've got a question from Councillor Ryan Holloway first, please. Sure. Ryan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, just a couple of quick things. Matt, thanks again for delivering that report. One of the things do agree with you on there. It's just going back to Agenda 8 on the item there is about family conferences. I think you're absolutely right. We really do need to be strengthening that. I think that is absolutely key. I think for moving forward, because it shows that we are getting we're giving our families as much support as we can as a local authority. And just another obviously quick thing, which I know you did touch on when you were addressing the report. This is jumping now to Agenda 9 about the health assessments, about being completed within 20 working days. Yet I'm glad that you did touch that, and obviously the data shows that we do need to improve on that. I can understand at the moment that because of the pandemic could be delaying that. But I think we do need to be showing we do need to show some signs of improvement on that, because obviously the figure has sort of rapidly declined of the latest data we're showing. So I'm glad you did touch that in your report. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. Councillor Weller, do you mind if I just quickly respond?
Sorry. No, please do.
Thank you. Absolutely, it's not the position we want to be in, but absolutely, there's a lot of work and joint working going on with housing, with health. Sorry, I can't get my words out. And also with other departments within Dorset Council to absolutely change that position. And I am confident moving forward we'll start to see a steady increase in improvement quite rapidly. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sarah Jane, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just really to wrap around what Matt is saying, and what the data really shows you as well is that we are assuring ourselves in many different ways that the right children are coming into our care. So really good focus on the locality being successful in doing everything that it possibly can do with our partnership to wrap around families to help them care for their children if at all possible. And of course, as we know, sometimes it won't be possible. So children who are coming into our care are the right children. All of the things you've heard are all the great things that we're doing to make sure we've got the right carers for them. Really important. But the focus that Matt's given you as well is the work that we're doing with our children who we're currently caring for to make sure that they get to their right permanence plan. Absolutely. At the right time. And we know, and we've talked here before about the fact that we haven't been as quick as we could have been with those plans. So we're really given that focus. So I hope that what you'll see is that data set starting to really bear that out. And Matt will keep bringing those updates back to us as well. But huge amount of work from Matt and his team, which has been really, really welcomed.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And thank you for that, Matt. Thank you, Sarah Jane. The only thing I want to add to that is what we have to take care of, I think, is that we don't focus so heavily on all the data and the plans being in place, and we tick all those boxes so that, you know, if somebody came along and examined us, we'd look wonderful on paper, but actually what all those ticks are doing are hiding the fact that we've got problems somewhere else. You know, we've got to get a balance there, and I'm not suggesting that we're at that point at the moment, but it's something that we need to be keeping aware of. I've just had a message up, Matt, to say that we're close to coming to the end of this meeting, so I need you to do item 10 really quickly before we all fall down a black hole or whatever happens at the end of a team meeting, and then we have to come back in because we've got some exempt
No.
business. Okay.
No worries, I'll do that as quickly as I can. Just one other thing, just to end off, sorry, is that we absolutely know our children, and from our perspective, we have monthly reporting where they are in detail, so that it's not just a tick box exercise. This is absolutely that we're doing the right thing for our children. Any learning when things have gone off track, I do feedback as well to our service, so we're absolutely constantly learning and improving. I just wanted to put that up. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's the case, Matt.
Brilliant. Really quickly, should I do the next item?
Yeah, Councillor Jones, if you have to leave, thank you very much indeed for your input, and we'll catch up with you very soon on those other things that have occurred in the chat bar. Matt, carry on.
Thank you. So just really quickly to introduce this was Anne's part from Participation People. Just to set the scene really quickly, we have changed some of the wording and trimmed down what our concerns, the challenge cards that we've had. What I would say is moving forward, there's going to be further sessions with our care leavers, children in care, to really just update our challenge cards that we've got so far. So I'm quite happy to share my screen and just because of time, do you want me to just quickly go through them? Would that be helpful?
Matt, can I just confirm that's exempt, isn't it? Is that?
I was just going to ask. Is that
apologies.
Yeah.
So Kem is just to confirm the date of the next meeting. Sorry, it's Kate
Yes.
Critchell.
Apologies.
Yes. Kate, I was just going to say exactly the same thing. We need to do item 10, which is the date of the next meeting, and then we close this meeting and go into the exempt part, Matt. So
apologies.
That, okay.
No problem.
Sure. Sorry, just in terms of the next meeting, the agenda is set for the 1st of March. It's an informal meeting, and yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Kate Critchell, how does this work? Do you shut us down and start us again, or we stop recording?
Take item 11, which is to propose that we go
Yes.
into exempt business.
Yeah.
So once that's proposed and seconded, if you could just kind of formally close the public element of the meeting, Darren Richardson, who is producing us today, he will then shut down the public element, and he will let us know when that is stopped, so that we can then continue in exempt business. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Kathy, did you need to say something before I do that?
I was just going to propose that we go into exempt business.
Lovely, thank you very much. And I'll second. Oh, we've got lots and lots of people seconding there. Kate, Councillor Biggs and Councillor Holloway. So if we close that part of the meeting, and if technical support can do that for us, thank you.
Just like hold on one moment, just chat amongst yourselves.
Thank you very much.